Imagine a country that has achieved an absolute elite level statistical equality between men and women.
Right. Like the top of the charts.
Exactly. A nation that ranks 24th in the entire world for gender parity. I mean, they are completely outpacing dozens of highly industrialized, incredibly wealthy nations.
Which is an incredible feat on paper.
It is, and you picture this place and you naturally imagine, a progressive utopia, right? You imagine thriving metropolises, boardrooms filled with female executives, state-of-the-art hospitals.
A flourishing middle class.
Yeah, exactly. But then you turn the page of the data report we have today, and the illusion completely shatters.
It really does.
Because in this very same country, the statistical beacon of gender equality, the average man will not live to see his 55th birthday.
It's a profound structural contradiction.
Yeah.
You have an index indicating a near-perfect balance, sitting right alongside demographic realities that reflect, frankly, deep systemic collapse.
Which completely forces us to reevaluate how we measure human progress in the first place.
Absolutely.
Welcome, everyone. We have a massive stack of data sitting on the table for today's deep dive.
We really do.
We are looking at global human development indices spanning all the way from 1990 to 2023. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of aggregated data points tracking, how long we live, how much we learn, and the actual purchasing power of our daily lives.
But we aren't here to just read a spreadsheet to you.
No, definitely not. Our mission today is to unpack a bizarre, almost unbelievable statistical paradox hiding right in the middle of these numbers.
And to understand this paradox, we have to look closely at a tiny, landlocked nation in southern Africa, Lesotho.
Right, Lesotho. So according to the 2023 data, Lesotho has a Gender Development Index, or GDI, value of 1.006.
Which is wild.
It is, because on this specific index, a 1.0 means perfect parity. So at 1.006, women in Lesotho are actually doing slightly better, or at least equally as well, as men in the core metrics of human development.
That score places them in the elite group 1 globally, ranked 24 in the world.
Which is a staggering achievement if you're viewing that metric in total isolation.
But you can't view it in isolation.
You really can't, because when you look at Lesotho's overall Human Development Index, which is the baseline measurement for a nation's prosperity, they rank an abysmal 167th out of 193 nations.
Yeah.
So I want you to visualize the stark reality of what we're dissecting today. Picture a minimalist white wall. On the left side, painted in bright, bold letters, is the number 24.
And on the right side, painted in heavy dark gray, is the number 167.
Right. The central question we are going to explore with you today is exactly that gap.
Why is a country that has achieved near-perfect statistical gender equality still trapped in severe poverty?
Yeah, what are the actual mechanics of a society where women are technically, winning the development race, but the entire nation is essentially left behind?
Does equality inherently guarantee prosperity?
You might be looking at that 1.006 score and assuming the answer is yes. But before we can solve this paradox, we need to clarify our tools. We need the key to the map.
Because the data we are looking at is full of acronyms.
Oh, so many acronyms. HDI, GDI, IHDI, GII. It can easily turn into alphabet soup if we aren't careful.
Exactly.
So let's build our analytical foundation. Let's start with the absolute baseline. What is the architecture of the Human Development Index, the HDI?
Well, the HDI was created to solve a very specific problem in macroeconomics. For decades, the global community essentially judged a country's success solely by its gross domestic product.
Right, the GDP, just raw money.
Exactly. If the GDP was high, the country was considered developed. But economists realized that raw wealth doesn't necessarily translate to human well-being.
Makes sense.
So the United Nations Development Program created the HDI as a composite index. It normalizes 3 entirely different dimensions of human life into a single score between 0 and 1.
So it's translating different units like years of age and dollars in a bank account into a universal language.
Precisely. The 3 dimensions are, first, a long and healthy life, which is measured strictly by life expectancy at birth.
Okay, health.
Second, access to knowledge. This is measured by combining the expected years of schooling for children just entering the system and the mean years of schooling that adults have actually completed.
Health and knowledge, got it. And the third?
A decent standard of living, measured by gross national income, or GNI per capita, adjusted for purchasing power.
Okay, health, knowledge, and standard of living. That makes total sense. So how does the Gender Development Index, the GDI, interact with that?
The GDI takes that exact same framework and applies it through a demographic filter. It calculates the HDI specifically for the female population and then calculates it specifically for the male population.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the GDI is simply the ratio between those two scores.
Yeah.
If the female score matches the male score, your GDI is 1.0.
Okay, let me try an analogy here to make sure we're locking this in for everyone listening. Let's say human development is a car.
Okay, I like where this is going.
So the HDI tells us the speed of our car, right?
Yep.
How much horsepower we have, how fast we're cruising down the highway. The GDI just tells us if the driver and the passenger are experiencing the exact same ride. But it doesn't actually tell us if the car is moving fast.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. I love that.
Yeah.
The GDI measures the equity of the ride, not the speed of the vehicle.
Exactly.
You could have two people perfectly sharing a car that is broken down on the side of the highway. They're equally frustrated, equally stranded, but structurally they are equal.
Which implies that the GDI completely ignores the absolute ceiling of development. It only cares about the gap between the two demographics.
That is the exact mathematical vulnerability of the index. And we have two other indices in our data stack that reveal other vulnerabilities: the Inequality-Adjusted HDI, or IHDI, and the Gender Inequality Index, the GII.
Wait, how are those different?
Well, to use your analogy, the IHDI shows us if there are massive internal potholes ruining the suspension for half the passengers in the back seat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the GII looks at specific physical barriers like maternal health rather than just achievements. But we'll get into the weeds on those shortly.
Right, right. To truly understand how deeply Lesotho falls into this mathematical vulnerability, we have to establish a global baseline first.
We need to look at what the rest of the world has been doing over the last 30 years.
Let's pull up those global trend lines. The data set spans from 1990 to 2023. When you look at the macro view, the overarching narrative of human history over the last 3 decades is one of relentless systemic resilience.
It really is an upward climb.
Yeah. In 1993, the Global Gender Development Index was sitting at 0.908. Fast forward to 2023, and it has steadily climbed to 0.955. We are, as a species, inching closer to parity.
The overall Human Development Index for the globe mirrors that climb. In the early 90s, the global HDI was hovering around 0.60.
That's pretty low.
It was. But by 2023, the global value reached 0.737 for women and 0.772 for men.
That's a massive jump.
It's the direct result of huge global campaigns to eradicate preventable diseases, the expansion of primary education into the developing world, and global supply chains lifting hundreds of millions out of extreme poverty.
But the data isn't a perfect, smooth, upward curve. There is a massive structural shock right near the end of the timeline.
The 2020 drop.
Exactly. Looking at the data from 2020 and 2021, the global female HDI drops from 0.723 in 2019 down to 0.722, and it just stagnates. The male HDI takes a harder hit, dropping from 0.764 down to 0.758 in 2021.
That is the statistical fingerprint of the global pandemic. It is incredibly rare for the global HDI to reverse like that.
It takes a lot to move the whole globe backward.
It requires an external shock so profound that it simultaneously damages all 3 pillars of the index at once. Supply chains collapsed, devastating income. Schools worldwide closed their doors, pausing education.
And the healthcare systems were overwhelmed, causing that temporary but sharp decline in global life expectancy.
It's essentially a moment where the entire global engine stalled. But what's fascinating is the recovery data.
Yeah, by 2023, the global HDI rebounded past its pre-2019 levels. It hit new historical highs.
That speaks to the elasticity of established human development. When a highly developed nation faces a crisis, their indices might drop. But the underlying physical infrastructure, the universities, the paved roads, the hospitals, it doesn't just disappear.
Right.
Once the biological shock of the pandemic eased, the infrastructure allowed the metrics to snap back to their historical trend lines.
So we have our global coordinates. The world is generally moving upward. Global life expectancy is rising, education is expanding, and incomes are recovering.
The average global HDI is roughly 0.75.
Okay, now let's take that global lens and focus it directly on Lesotho, because against that backdrop of global resilience, their stagnation is glaring.
Let's look at their 2023 baseline numbers. This is where the math gets incredibly sobering.
It really does. In 2023, women in Lesotho have an HDI score of 0.550. The men have an HDI score of 0.547.
I want you to hold those two numbers in your mind, 0.550 and 0.550.
The first thing that hits you is how far below the global average they are. I mean, 0.75 globally versus 0.55. They are trailing the rest of the world by a massive margin.
A huge margin.
But the second thing, the math that triggers this entire paradox, is that 0.550 is larger than 0.547. Because the female score is slightly higher, the resulting GDI ratio hits that 1.006.
Which mathematically secures their rank as the 24th most gender-equal nation on Earth for human development.
Here is where it gets really interesting, though. If the women are technically winning in development compared to the men, why is the overall score so incredibly low?
Right.
Like it's highly equal, but equally what? What are we actually celebrating here?
Well, we aren't celebrating anything. What the data is illustrating is a concept development economists refer to as the equality of poverty.
The equality of poverty.
Yes, I want you to visualize a quadrant chart. On the
Right.
horizontal axis at the bottom, you have your overall HDI, how developed the nation is. And on the vertical axis on the left, you have the GDI, how equal the nation is.
Okay, I see it.
A country like Norway or Switzerland sits proudly in the top right corner. Maximum human development, maximum gender equality. Wealth and health are high, and they are shared equally. But Lesotho is marooned in the extreme top left corner. They have maximum equality, but minimum development.
Wow.
It is an isolated statistical island of parity in an ocean of severe deprivation.
So using our car analogy earlier, it's not just that the men and women are sharing an old car, it's that the car is actively breaking down, missing tires, no AC, but they are technically experiencing the exact same terrible ride.
Exactly. And to prove just how broken that vehicle is, we need to dismantle the HDI score and look at its individual components. Let's start with the most visceral metric, life expectancy at birth.
This part of the data stack is genuinely difficult to process. If we look at the global averages for 2023, the life expectancy for a woman is roughly 75.8 years.
And for a man, it's about 70.9 years.
Right. We expect to live into our 70s. But in Lesotho, a woman born in 2023 has a life expectancy of 60.0 years. And a man has a life expectancy of 54.6 years.
That is an average lifespan that is 16 years shorter than the global baseline.
You really have to pause and consider the reality of that number. Think about what it means for a society when the average male barely reaches his mid-50s.
It completely rewires the structure of a society.
It does. Think about the loss of institutional memory. In a healthy economy, your most skilled workers, your master electricians, your senior managers, they're in their 50s and 60s. They train the next generation.
Right.
If the average male dies at 54, that entire layer of mentorship is effectively erased.
And it creates a catastrophic burden on the youth. You have children who are forced to become primary caregivers for ailing parents much earlier in life.
Which pulls them out of the economy.
Exactly. You have a massive increase in single-parent households and orphan children. The entire social safety net, which in many developing nations relies heavily on extended family structures rather than government welfare, is stretched to the absolute breaking point.
And if we look back through the historical data provided in our sources, the context becomes even darker. Around 2005 and 2006, male life expectancy in Lesotho plummeted to an apocalyptic 41.4 years.
And female life expectancy dropped to 44.8 years.
41 years old, I mean, that's barely middle age.
While the raw index data doesn't explicitly name the epidemiological cause, a demographic collapse of that specific magnitude in southern Africa during the mid-2000s points unambiguously to a devastating health crisis.
We're talking about the HIV/AIDS epidemic, right?
Yes, it hollowed out an entire generation of working-age adults. The trauma of that era is permanently baked into their demographic pyramid. They have spent the last 15 years just trying to climb back up to 60.
So when we look at that 1.006 GDI score, yes, the math says women are doing better because they outlive men by about 5.5 years.
Right.
And since female life expectancy is a core input for the HDI, that slightly longer lifespan mathematically nudges the female score above the male score.
But it is the ultimate hollow victory.
It really is.
You are statistically winning because you survived to 60 while your male counterpart dies at 54. But you are both being robbed of a decade and a half of life compared to the global average. You're sharing a profoundly shortened, biologically compromised existence.
Okay, but this raises a massive logical question. If life expectancy is this devastatingly low across the board, what is actually pulling the women's HDI up to 0.550?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. What is acting as the counterweight to this health crisis to push their gender development index into that elite top tier? Because it certainly isn't the healthcare system.
No, it isn't. The primary engine driving Lesotho's high GDI ranking is actually found in the classrooms. We have to examine the education anomaly.
Let's dig into the schooling data. The index tracks two things: mean years of schooling, which is what adults have already completed, and expected years of schooling, which projects how long a child entering the system today will stay in it.
And globally, the historical trend has been that men edge out women in schooling, though that gap is rapidly closing.
Yeah, in 2023, the global average for men is 9.45 mean years. For women, it's 8.94.
But in Lesotho, that dynamic is completely inverted. They exhibit a structural reverse gender gap.
Let me read the exact numbers because they're fascinating. In 2023, women in Lesotho have 8.38 mean years of schooling compared to just 6.98 for men.
That's nearly a year and a half of educational deficit for the men.
And if we look at the projections for the youth today, the expected years of schooling females are expected to complete 11.3 years of education, while males are projected at just 10.7 years.
This is where we need to explain the how and the why behind the numbers. If you look at textbook development economics, the classic barrier to gender parity in the developing world is that girls are pulled out of school early.
Right, for early arranged marriages or domestic labor, or just because impoverished families prioritize school fees for their sons.
That is the standard narrative of global gender inequality. But the data in Lesotho completely rejects that narrative.
It turns it upside down.
It does. The data suggests an economic and social structure, where the boys are the ones being systematically pulled out of the formal education system.
To do what? Just manual labor.
To understand this, you have to look at the macroeconomic geography of Lesotho. It is a highly mountainous, heavily agrarian and pastoral society.
Okay.
In these specific rural economies, cattle and livestock are the primary forms of generational wealth and daily sustenance. And the cultural division of labor dictates that young boys are responsible for herding.
So they aren't just doing chores after school, they are physically leaving the community.
Yes. Herding in mountainous terrain often requires boys to travel far from their villages to highland pastures for extended periods. You cannot attend a secondary school in your village if you are living at a cattle post miles away in the mountains.
Wow, so the boys are absorbed into the informal agrarian labor market at a really early age.
Precisely. Meanwhile, the girls, whose domestic responsibilities keep them closer to the village center, remain geographically adjacent to the schools. Therefore, they stay in the education system significantly longer.
That is a brilliant mechanism to uncover because the girls are staying in school, reaching that 11.3 expected years, their educational indices skyrocket relative to the boys.
And since education accounts for a full third of the total HCI calculation, this academic advantage is the heavy mathematical lifting behind their number one tier GDI ranking.
It is the statistical anchor of their equality. The women are definitively, quantifiably more educated than the men.
Yes, they are.
So what does this all mean? Naturally, you would assume this leads to an economic triumph. That's the promise we are all sold, right? Education translates to earning power.
That is the logical assumption.
If you have a demographic of young women who are staying in school for 11 years, outpacing their male peers, they must be dominating the national economy. They must be the breadwinners.
But when we pull out the gross national income data, the GNI per capita, the illusion shatters. The economic reality brutally overrides the educational advantage.
Let's look at the income data, adjusted for purchasing power parity, so we're comparing apples to apples globally. In 2023, the global average GNI for men is over $25,000, and for women, it's almost $15,000.
Now, let's look at Lesotho.
The women in Lesotho, despite their significant educational advantage, have a GNI per capita of just $2,495.
And the men, who dropped out of school earlier to herd cattle or enter manual labor, make $3,592.
I mean, the irony is just painful. Despite having significantly more schooling, women still make about $1,000 less than men in GNI.
We have to unpack the layers of failure happening here. First, yes, despite being more educated, a severe gender pay gap still exists. Women are making significantly less than men.
Right.
But we cannot let the pay gap distract from the much larger, much more terrifying macroeconomic failure. Both of those numbers are essentially rounding errors on the global stage.
The national average is around $3,000. That is roughly 15% of the global average.
It is the definition of a poverty trap. The gender gap in income is muted by the sheer weight of total national deprivation.
It's like two people on a sinking ship arguing over who has the slightly taller life preserver. I mean, education is not translating into economic prosperity because the national economic engine simply isn't there.
Exactly. Going back to our car analogy, you have successfully upgraded the software, but there's no hardware to run it. You have a generation of young women with 11 years of schooling, They are capable, they are ready to execute complex tasks.
But there is no corporate sector to absorb them.
There's no advanced manufacturing, no robust tech industry, no high-yield commercial agriculture infrastructure. You can have all the human capital in the world, but if the macroeconomic infrastructure doesn't exist to employ that capital, the education cannot convert into wealth.
So the boys drop out to enter the informal agrarian economy, and the girls graduate only to find that the formal economy they prepared for is a mirage.
Yes, the high GDI score suggests female empowerment. But the GNI data proves that Lesotho is stuck in a structural vacuum where education does not yield economic mobility.
Which naturally leads to the next question. Earlier, we talked about perfect equality between men and women. But if the average income is only $3,000 and everyone is trapped in this low-yield economy, is Lesotho actually an equal society?
Are there any resources in this country?
Right. To figure that out, we have to introduce a new diagnostic tool from the data stack, the Inequality Adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
This is where we look at the internal distribution of resources. The regular HDI, which for Lesotho sits at 0.550, is an average. But averages can be incredibly deceptive.
Oh, absolutely.
If your head is in a hot oven and your feet are in a chest freezer, your average body temperature might be perfectly normal, but you are actively dying.
That's a dark analogy, but yeah, it makes the point. Averages obscure the extremes. So what happens when we adjust Lesotho's HDI of 0.550 for internal inequality?
When we apply the inequality adjustment, Lesotho's HDI plummets from 0.550 down to a staggering 0.357 in 2023.
0.357. That is an overall human development loss of 35.09%.
It is a massive erosion. To give you some context, the global average loss when adjusting for inequality is roughly 21.9%.
Wow, so Lesotho is hemorrhaging 35% of its potential simply because the resources that do exist are so violently hoarded.
Exactly. And we need to clarify a crucial distinction here. If the Gender Development Index, the GDI, is 1.006, meaning men and women are statically equal, then who is experiencing this 35% inequality?
Wait, yeah. If men and women are equal, who is the gap between?
The gap is structural and geographic. Gender is just one specific slice of the demographic pie. A 35% loss indicates massive disparity within the population, between the few who have resources and the vast majority who do not.
Ah, I see.
It points to a stark disparity between the relatively developed urban capital, where a small sliver of the population has access to government jobs, capital, and private health care, and the deep rural highlands, where the vast majority of the population lives in subsistence conditions.
So you have a wealthy man and a wealthy woman at the top of the societal pyramid, perfectly equal in their wealth. And you have a desperately poor man and a desperately poor woman at the bottom of the pyramid, perfectly equal in their poverty.
Yes, and to understand what that poverty at the bottom actually looks like, we have to look at another specific metric included in our sources: the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI.
The MPI is fascinating because it doesn't just look at whether you have money. It looks at the actual physical deprivations in your daily household life.
It measures the micro-level reality. And the 2024 MPI data shows that a full 25% of Lesotho's population lives in multidimensional poverty.
A quarter of the country.
Yes. But the critical insight is what is driving that poverty.
Yes.
The data breaks down the core contributors. Lack of adequate nutrition contributes 24.8%, lack of modern cooking fuel contributes 11.2%, and lack of electricity contributes 10.5%.
So we aren't just talking about a lack of disposable income. We are talking about a quarter of the population lacking the caloric intake necessary to maintain a healthy body. We are talking about families burning biomass inside their homes for cooking, which leads to chronic respiratory diseases. We are talking about living entirely off the electrical grid.
Which loops right back to our life expectancy crisis. When nutrition is the primary driver of multidimensional poverty, your biological baseline is compromised from birth.
The extreme inequality in income and life expectancy drags the true human experience for the median citizen far below what that initial 0.550 HDI suggests.
For millions of people, the daily reality is that 0.357 number.
This is where the data really starts to hurt. And it brings me to a glaring contradiction in the report that I almost couldn't wrap my head around.
Let's hear it.
We've established that Lesotho has this elite gender development index ranking. They're 24th in the world for GDI. It proves women are equal to men in human development.
Statistically, yes.
But then I turn to the different metric, the Gender Inequality Index, or the GII. And their rank completely collapses. They rank a dismal 151st in the world for gender inequality.
Yes. High gender development, but severe gender inequality. It sounds like a paradox within a paradox.
How is that mathematically possible? How can a country be top tier in gender development but bottom tier in gender inequality? It feels like the data is actively contradicting itself.
It isn't a contradiction. It's a difference in exactly what is being measured. As we discussed earlier, the GDI measures raw achievements. How many years you sat in a classroom, how many dollars you earned, how long your heart kept beating.
Right.
But the GII, the Gender Inequality Index, measures the physical and social barriers that are specific to women. It looks at reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market.
Okay, so it measures the hurdles, not just the finish line.
Exactly. And the smoking gun in Lesotho's GII data is maternal health.
Let me look at the numbers here. The maternal mortality ratio, the MMR, this metric tracks how many women die from pregnancy-related causes per 100,000 live births.
And in highly developed nations, this number is often in the single digits, maybe 10 or 15.
But in Lesotho, the data shows an MMR of 566.2 deaths per 100,000 live births, and that's holding steady through 2022. The adolescent birth rate is 70.6 births per 1,000 young women.
We really need to slow down and process the human cost of that statistic. 566 women dying for every 100,000 babies born.
It's horrifying.
We are talking about a society where the fundamental biological act of continuing the human race carries a statistically lethal risk. And we have to ask why. Why is the MMR so high?
It goes back to the lack of infrastructure we discussed in the economic data, doesn't it?
Exactly. If a woman in a remote highland village experiences a hemorrhage during labor, her survival depends entirely on logistics. Are there paved roads to transport her? Is there an ambulance with fuel?
And when she arrives at the clinic, is there a sterile surgical suite? Is there a reliable blood bank?
Right. And based on the multidimensional poverty data we just looked at, the answer to almost all of those logistical questions is no.
This is the flaw in the matrix. GDI only looks at education, income, and overall lifespan. It completely ignores the unique physical risks women face.
A society can have perfect parity in school attendance. But if hundreds of women are dying in childbirth because of a lack of healthcare infrastructure, the equality is an illusion.
You can be statistically equal on paper, but physically imperiled in reality. It's incredibly cruel. You have this generation of young women doing everything right, staying in school, getting an education, only to enter their childbearing years in a medical system that fundamentally endangers their lives.
It is a harsh empirical reminder that true equity is not just about matching the men's scores on a test. True equity is about securing the specific physical infrastructure women need to survive.
And what about the labor force? Because following up on the GII, it measures labor market participation too, right?
It does. And the empowerment data provides the final puzzle piece regarding why that 11-year educational advantage isn't translating.
The data shows the female labor force participation rate is 53.64% compared to the male rate of 63.89%.
So there is a roughly 10% gap. Now, while the gap isn't as massive as in some regions globally, it shows definitively that the educational advantage women hold is not translating into labor market dominance.
I want you listening to ponder what happens to all those educated young women if the formal economy can't absorb them.
It creates a tremendous amount of social friction.
Think about the psychological toll. You finish secondary school, you achieve the highest levels of education in your community, and then you graduate into a macroeconomic void where barely half of women can even find a place in the labor force.
They are trapped between their individual educational achievements and the harsh reality of their nation's structural limitations.
Okay, I have to be honest. Navigating this data has been incredibly heavy. I am sighing just looking at these pages. It is a relentless barrage of systemic roadblocks.
It is a tough data set to parse.
So when I was looking through the last pile of sources, I was desperately searching for a bright spot, a silver lining. And I thought I found it with the PHDI.
Ah, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
Yes, the Green Index. This metric is fascinating. It basically takes a country's regular HDI score and asks, okay, you've achieved this level of development, but how much are you destroying the Earth to get there?
It penalizes the score based on carbon dioxide emissions per capita and material footprint.
And globally, when you account for carbon emissions and material footprint, the world's HDI drops by over 10%. We are burning fossil fuels and consuming resources at an astonishing rate to keep our global engine running.
But Lesotho's
carbon dioxide emissions per capita are a microscopic 1.669 tons compared to the global 4.53. Their score barely drops at all. They are incredibly green.
They are statistically very green,
Yeah.
but we have to apply the same rigorous analysis to this metric that we applied to the others.
You're going to ruin my silver lining, aren't you?
I am, yeah. Because Lesotho lacks heavy industrialization, they are putting almost zero pressure on the planet. Their low emissions are not the result of advanced post-industrial green technology.
Right, they don't have high emissions because they don't have massive manufacturing plants.
Exactly. You cannot have a high material footprint if you cannot afford to consume materials. It is an environmental spillover effect of poverty.
It's a tragic irony. The only area where Lesotho wins on the global stage, where they truly outshine the developed world, is their lack of pollution. But that victory is solely due to their lack of economic development.
It forces the global community to confront a deeply uncomfortable question. How do we help developing nations industrialize and increase their HDI without having them replicate the carbon-heavy mistakes of the West?
It is a monumental challenge. Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We've looked at the global baseline, the extremes of Lesotho, the life expectancy collapse, the education anomaly, the poverty trap, the maternal health crisis.
Let's start to pull all the threads together for the listener. Let's synthesize this.
Let's build the logical chain of the paradox we started with.
Okay, visually, I want you to picture a cycle. It begins with high education for women because the boys are out hurting. This leads to a great GDI score.
Right, ranked 24 in the world.
But step two, the lack of industry means there's no income growth to absorb that education.
The GNI is trapped at 15% of the global average.
Which leads to step three. A lack of national wealth means a lack of healthcare infrastructure, leading to horrific maternal mortality and low lifespans.
Resulting in a bottom-tier overall HDI ranking of 167th.
Exactly. High education creates a statistical illusion of parity, but extreme poverty dictates the brutal reality of the outcome.
So the absolute crux of this entire deep dive, the core insight, is that gender equality in a low-income country manifests as equal poverty.
Yes.
Without a breakthrough in macroeconomics and basic healthcare infrastructure, a single dimension of equality, like schooling, cannot lift a nation into prosperity. You can fix the classroom, but if you don't build the hospital and the factory, the society stays trapped.
Knowledge is only valuable when it is understood and applied. If a nation is trapped in this specific paradox, we have to look at actionable takeaways. What is the path forward?
How do we upgrade the hardware to match the software?
The data points to three logical steps for a nation in this paradox. First, medical breakthroughs targeting maternal mortality and base life expectancy. You cannot develop a highly functioning human society if women are dying in childbirth at a rate of 566 per 100,000.
Stabilizing the biological baseline is paramount.
Second, economic engines that translate women's education into actual labor market power. The country needs investment to build industries that require a literate, educated workforce. The human capital is already sitting in the classrooms.
They just need the economic engines to employ them. And the third step,
Targeted poverty relief to close that massive 35 per 70 HDI inequality gap. We must ensure wealth isn't just hoarded in the urban centers, but distributed to the rural highlands to fight that multidimensional poverty.
equality between men and women has been statistically secured on paper. The next frontier is securing equality between the rich and the poor.
Exactly. Equality is a vital foundation, but it is not the entire house.
This has been one of the most eye-opening journeys through a dataset. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a lingering, provocative question to mull over.
Something to think about the next time you see a headline celebrating a new statistical milestone.
We spend so much time globally fighting for gender equality, assuming it will naturally lead to human flourishing. But if a society can achieve perfect statistical equality while its people barely live to see 60, are we sometimes so obsessed with closing the gap between men and women that we forget to raise the floor beneath both of them?
It really makes you rethink the metrics we value.
It does. Look past the index rankings and look for the human reality. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and remember to stay curious.